Amora Jones stood in the dim alley behind the diner, staring at $8 crumpled in her hand. Her last $8, her daughter's breakfast money for tomorrow. The smell of grease and garbage hung in the air. Then she heard the sound. A guttural gasp, a desperate fight for air. A large, impeccably dressed man had collapsed near a black sedan, clutching his chest. His face, once powerful, was turning a ghostly gray. He was dying right there on the grimy pavement, and no one else was around. "Don't get involved, Frank," the diner's cook shouted from the back doorway, a cigarette dangling from his lips. "You know who that is? That's Don Romano. Those people are poison." Amora looked at the dying man, then at the meager $8. She pictured her daughter Zoe waking up hungry, a familiar ache twisting in her gut. But she couldn't just walk away. The image of a man dying alone was too much to bear. She ran back inside, past a startled Frank, and burst out the front door to the 24-hour pharmacy next door. She bought a small bottle of aspirin and a bottle of water with her last $8, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She knelt beside him, saving his life without a clue as to who he really was. What Amora didn't know was that this one choice would change everything. Because the next morning, a fleet of 100 black sedans rolled silently onto her street. Let me take you back to the morning before everything changed. Amora's alarm blared at 5 a.m., the same jarring sound that started every single day. She dragged herself out of her worn-out bed in the tiny, two-room apartment she shared with her 6-year-old daughter, Zoe. The place was small and located in a neighborhood that had long been forgotten by prosperity, but the walls held all the love she had, and it was their home. She walked into the kitchen and opened a nearly bare cabinet. One box of generic cereal, almost empty. A half carton of milk in the fridge. She poured the last few flakes into Zoe's bowl, adding just enough milk to make it a meal, carefully stretching it as far as it would go. Zoe came padding out of the bedroom in her pink pajamas, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "Morning, Mommy." "Morning, baby," Amora whispered, kissing the top of her head and setting the bowl on their small, wobbly table. She didn't make a bowl for herself. There wasn't enough. This was her reality now, counting every single dollar, stretching every meal, and praying that no unexpected emergency would shatter their fragile existence. There was no cushion, no safety net, nothing to fall back on. Amora worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat. Her mornings were spent at a bustling downtown coffee shop, clearing tables and running orders for $11 an hour. Her evenings were at the diner, a classic spot serving truckers and late-night crowds, where she hustled for tips that sometimes added up to $20, and sometimes, heartbreakingly less. Her car had broken down 3 weeks ago, a catastrophic transmission failure she couldn't possibly afford to fix. So now, she walked everywhere, miles to her first job, miles to the second, and miles back home in sneakers with a hole forming in the left sole. And the bills kept coming, relentless and unforgiving. Rent was due in 3 days, and she was still $150 short. The landlord, a man with no patience for excuses, had already threatened eviction once. Zoe's asthma inhaler needed a refill, a $60 expense that felt like $1 million. An overdue notice for the electricity bill was taped to the fridge, a stark, yellow reminder of her failure. But Amora never complained. She'd learned a long time ago that complaining didn't pay the bills. Her grandmother had raised her with one simple rule that she held onto like a lifeline. "Kindness costs nothing, baby," she used to say, "and sometimes it's all we've got to give." So, Amora smiled at her coworkers even when exhaustion was a physical weight on her shoulders. She asked customers how their day was going, genuinely interested, even when her feet ached so badly she could barely stand. She kept a small journal by her bed where she wrote down 3 things she was grateful for every single night, no matter how hard the day had been. That Tuesday began just like any other. She walked Zoe to her neighbor's apartment before school, then headed to the coffee shop. She spent 8 hours on her feet, a blur of coffee cups, plates, and endless cleaning. At 2 p.m., she clocked out and began the walk to the diner. Her shift didn't start until 3, but she liked to get there early, grab a cup of coffee, and sit in a back booth to just breathe for a few precious minutes. Brenda, her coworker at the diner, a kind older woman who had seen it all in her 20 years there, slid into the booth across from her. "You look tired, honey." "I'm always tired," Amora said with a small, weary smile. "You work yourself to the bone for that little girl. She's worth it." Brenda patted her hand, her touch warm and motherly. "I know she is. But you've got to take care of yourself, too. You hear me?" Amora nodded, but they both knew it was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her evening shift was a whirlwind. Truckers wanting refills, a few families with tired children, some teenagers ordering late-night fries. She smiled, she took orders, she refilled coffee cups, and she kept moving, a constant blur of motion. By 10 p.m., when her shift finally ended, her tips amounted to a disappointing $23. She sat in the small break room, counting the cash on the table. $23 in tips, plus the $8.47 she'd had left from the day before. $31.47 in total. She needed to keep enough for the bus to work tomorrow, just in case it rained. That left her with $31. She tucked $23 away for the rent, a small drop in a very large bucket. That left $8. $8 for Zoe's breakfast and maybe something small for their dinner tomorrow night. She folded the bills carefully, a lump forming in her throat, and put them in her pocket. Then she started the 2-mile walk home, pulling her thin jacket tighter around her. The streets were quiet, cloaked in the late-night stillness. Amora was exhausted, but she kept her head up and her pace steady. She decided to cut through the alley behind the diner. It shaved a few minutes off her walk. That's when everything changed. That's when she heard the man gasping for air. And in that moment, Amora Jones had a choice to make. A choice that would cost her every penny she had. A choice that would save a life. A choice that would reveal the true depth of her character when no one was watching. She had no idea that this one decision, made in a dark and grimy alley, would change her life forever. Amora took a step out of the diner's back door into the alley. A single, flickering bulb overhead cast long, dancing shadows. It was just past 11 p.m., and the city had quieted to a low hum. That's when she saw him. The man was massive, dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than her rent, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He was leaning against a gleaming black sedan parked under the light, a car so out of place in this alley it looked like it had landed from another planet. Even from a distance, Amora could feel an aura of power and danger radiating from him. She'd seen men like him in the diner before, men who spoke in low voices and had others jump to their every command. She started walking toward the street, determined to mind her own business. Then the man stumbled. His hand shot to his chest, his face contorting in agony. He dropped to one knee, his breath catching in a choked, desperate gasp. Amora stopped dead in her tracks. The man collapsed onto the pavement, flat on his back. His breathing came in short, ragged bursts. His lips were turning blue. She stood there, frozen, every survival instinct screaming at her to keep walking. This wasn't her problem. She had Zoe to think about. She had more than enough trouble in her own life. But then she heard it, or rather, the lack of it. A terrifying silence. The man wasn't breathing anymore. His chest had stopped moving. "Hey!" Amora shouted toward the diner's back door. "Frank, call 911. Frank, the cook, a cynical man in his 50s, stepped out, wiping his greasy hands on his apron. He glanced at the man on the ground, then at Amora, and his eyes widened in recognition and fear. "Lady, are you crazy? That's Don Marcello Romano. The bull. Leave him alone. He probably got what was coming to him." "He's having a heart attack," Amora said, her voice rising with panic. Frank shrugged, his expression cold. "Not our problem. You don't get involved with the Romano family. Trust me, you'll regret it." An older man, a trucker she recognized from the diner, walked out into the alley to have a smoke. He saw the scene and shook his head in disgust. He walked over to Amora and grabbed her arm gently. "Miss, listen to me. Don't get involved. People like that, they are dangerous. You look like you've got a kid to think about. Just walk away. Amora pulled her arm back. A man is dying. The trucker shook his head again, muttered something about fools, and walked back to his rig. He drove off without a second glance. Amora stood there alone in the alley. Frank had already gone back inside, leaving her with the dying man. She looked down at him. His chest was still. His face was ashen. She thought about her grandmother. Years ago, her grandmother had collapsed on a city sidewalk from a stroke. People walked right past her. No one stopped. By the time someone finally called for help, it was too late. Amora had been 12 when she got that phone call. She'd never forgotten the hollow feeling of that loss, of that indifference. She dropped to her knees beside the man. Sir? Sir, can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open, just barely. He tried to speak, but only a faint wheeze came out. Meds. Forgot. Amora pulled out her phone. 1 bar of signal, 10% battery. She dialed 911. The call dropped. Damn it. She stood up and ran toward the 24-hour pharmacy on the corner. She burst through the door. A man is having a heart attack in the alley next door. Call an ambulance. The young clerk stared at her, but picked up the phone. Amora didn't wait. She scanned the shelves, grabbing a bottle of aspirin and a bottle of water. She ran to the counter and slammed them down. How much? $6.50. She pulled the crumpled $8 from her pocket, Zoe's breakfast money, and handed it over. The clerk gave her $1.50 in change. She didn't wait for a receipt. She ran back outside. The man was still on the ground, barely conscious. Amora twisted the cap off the aspirin bottle, shook 2 tablets into her hand, opened the water, and knelt beside him again. Hey! Hey, look at me! I need you to chew these. Can you do that? He opened his mouth weakly. She placed the tablets on his tongue. Chew. Come on, he chewed slowly, wincing with the effort. She held the water bottle to his lips, and he took a small, shaky sip. Help is coming, she said, her hand on his shoulder, a small point of contact in the terrifying chaos. You're going to be okay. Just stay with me. His hand reached up and grabbed hers. His grip was surprisingly strong. Your name, he whispered, his voice a gravelly rasp. Amora. Amora Jones. Amora, he coughed. You saved my life. Not yet, she said. But I'm trying. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing closer. Then, out of nowhere, another black sedan screeched into the alley. A younger man in a sharp suit, maybe 30, jumped out and ran over. Don Marcelo. Oh my God, boss. He dropped to his knees on the other side of the man. He looked at Amora, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and suspicion. You helped him. He needed help, Amora said simply. The younger man stared at her as if she'd just performed an impossible feat. Most people run the other way when they see us. Amora didn't respond. She just kept her hand on Don Marcelo's shoulder until the ambulance pulled into the alley. The paramedics rushed over with a stretcher and equipment. One of them looked at Amora. Did you give him anything? Yes, 2 aspirin maybe 3 minutes ago. The paramedic nodded, impressed. Smart move. You probably just saved his life. They loaded Don Marcelo onto the stretcher. He reached out and grabbed Amora's wrist one last time, his dark eyes locked onto hers. His voice was stronger now. Tell them the bull sent you. She had no idea what that meant. The younger man stood up as the ambulance doors closed. He walked over to Amora, pulled a thick, linen business card from his wallet, and handed it to her. It was plain cream with just a phone number and a small, embossed logo, a bull's head inside a laurel wreath. My name is Luca, he said, his voice low and serious. The Don is going to want to thank you. Please Please, call this number tomorrow. Amora took the card, her hand shaking. She looked at the logo, then back at Luca. Who is he? She asked, though she already feared she knew. Luca's expression was unreadable. Someone important, he said. Someone who never forgets a debt. Or an act of kindness. The ambulance pulled away, its sirens blaring into the night. Frank, the cook, stood in the diner doorway, arms crossed, shaking his head. Amora stood alone in the alley with $1.50 in her pocket and no idea what she had just stumbled into. She walked home in the dark, replaying every moment. Frank's warning echoed in her mind. You don't get involved with the Romano family. But all she had seen was a man who needed help. Had she made a colossal mistake? She didn't know yet, but she was about to find out. Amora's alarm went off at 5 a.m. a few hours later. She dragged herself out of bed, her body aching from the long day and the adrenaline crash of the night before. She walked into the kitchen and opened the cabinet. One banana, a handful of crackers. That was it. She split the banana in half, arranged the crackers on a plate, and poured a glass of water. Zoe came padding out. Morning, Mommy. What's for breakfast? A special breakfast today, baby, Amora forced a smile. Banana and crackers, your favorite. Zoe didn't complain. She never did. She climbed into her chair and started eating. Amora sat across from her, watching her, trying not to think about how empty the cabinets were, trying not to think about the $8 she'd spent. Then came a sharp knock at the door. Amora frowned. It was barely 7 a.m. She opened it to find Mrs. Gable, her neighbor, a woman in her 60s who had lived on the street for 30 years. She had her arms crossed and a deep frown etched on her face. Amora, baby, Mrs. Gable said, her voice tight with disapproval. We need to talk. Good morning, Mrs. Gable. Is everything okay? Mrs. Gable stepped closer and lowered her voice to a harsh whisper. I heard you helped one of those Romano thugs last night. In the alley behind the diner. Amora's stomach plummeted. He was having a heart attack, Mrs. Gable. I had to. Child, the Romanos are criminals, Mrs. Gable cut her off. Everyone knows it. Racketeering, violence. All kinds of trouble. What were you thinking? You have Zoe to think about. He was a human being who needed help, Amora said, her voice steady but quiet. That's all I saw. Mrs. Gable shook her head, disappointment clouding her features. You're too kind for your own good, Amora. That kindness is going to get you and your little girl hurt one day. Mark my words. She turned and walked back to her apartment, leaving Amora standing in the doorway, trembling. At the coffee shop, Amora worked on autopilot. Mrs. Gable's words kept replaying in her mind. That kindness is going to get you hurt. During her break, she told Brenda everything. The alley, the man, Don Romano, using her last $8. Brenda's eyes went wide. You helped Don Marcello Romano. Girl, you're either the bravest or the craziest woman I know. Or the stupidest, Amora muttered. According to my neighbor. Brenda reached over and squeezed her hand. Baby, you did what your heart told you to do. Don't you let anyone make you feel bad about that. But what if she's right? What if I brought trouble into our lives? Brenda looked her square in the eye. You saved a man's life, Amora. That is never the wrong thing to do. Amora wanted desperately to believe her, but a cold knot of doubt had taken root in her stomach. During her lunch break, she pulled out the business card. She stared at the bull's head logo, turning it over and over in her fingers. She pulled out her phone and typed a simple text message to the number. Hi, this is Amora Jones. Luca gave me this number. She hit send before she could change her mind. Within seconds, her phone rang. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. A minute later, she listened to the message. Amora, it's Luca. The Don wants to meet you today. Can you come to Bellini's on Grand Avenue at 3 p.m.? It's important. Please. Amora's heart pounded. Brenda leaned over. What did they say? They want to meet me this afternoon. Then go, Brenda said. What's the worst that could happen? You get a free fancy lunch. Amora tried to smile, but her stomach was in knots. She was off work at 2. She could make it. But what would people think? What if this really was a terrible mistake? As she left the coffee shop that afternoon, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. 2 black sedans were parked across the street. 2 men in dark suits watched her. When she looked at them, they gave a slight, respectful nod. Then they drove off. Amora stood on the sidewalk, her heart racing. What had she walked into? And more importantly, could she walk back out? Amora took the bus to Grand Avenue, her hands trembling in her lap. As the bus turned the corner, she saw them. Black sedans, dozens of them, parked in perfect, gleaming rows outside Bellini's, an opulent Italian restaurant she'd only ever seen in magazines. Her stomach dropped. The bus stopped, and Amora almost stayed in her seat, but some unseen force made her stand and walk towards that restaurant. Men in expensive suits lined the sidewalk. They were big men, with hard faces and watchful eyes. They weren't loud or overtly threatening. They were just waiting. As Amora walked past, each one nodded to her, a silent, coordinated gesture of respect that was more unnerving than any threat. She reached the heavy oak door, took a deep breath, and walked inside. Every booth and table was filled with more men in suits. The restaurant, usually filled with the sounds of clinking glasses and conversation, was dead silent. Every single person turned and looked at her as she entered. Luca appeared from the back of the restaurant, a small smile on his face. Amora. Thank you for coming. The Don is waiting. As they walked through the restaurant, something incredible happened. The men stood up. One by one, as she passed their tables, they rose to their feet, a silent wave moving through the room. Amora had no idea what it meant, but it felt solemn, almost sacred. Luca led her to a private corner booth. Don Marcello Romano sat there, looking pale but significantly better than he had the night before. When he saw her, he stood slowly, wincing from the effort. Amora Jones. Please, sit. She slid into the plush leather of the booth. The Don studied her, his dark eyes intense. I'm told the doctor said if you hadn't acted as fast as you did, I'd be dead. A massive coronary. I'm just glad you're okay, she said quietly. The Don leaned forward. Luca told me everything. You wouldn't take money. You work 2 jobs, you have a daughter. You used your last $8 to save my life. Amora shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't about the money. I know, he said. That is why I needed to meet you. He pulled out a worn photograph from his wallet and slid it across the table. It showed a younger Don Romano standing beside a beautiful woman. That's my wife, he said, his voice softening. Her name was Isabella. She was beautiful. She's gone, he said, his voice hardening again. 20 years ago, I was shot in a business dispute. I made it home, but I was bleeding badly. I sent one of my men to get a doctor, a good man who lived down the street. The doctor refused to come. He was afraid of getting involved with my family, afraid of what my rivals might do to him. By the time we got to a hospital that would treat me, Isabella. She was caught in the crossfire of another attack meant for me. She bled out in my arms because a good man was too afraid to help. Amora's throat tightened. I'm so sorry. The Don's jaw was a tight line of muscle. After she died, I made a promise. Anyone who shows true kindness, who helps without fear or judgment, especially when they have nothing themselves, I help them. It's what Isabella would have wanted. He looked Amora directly in the eye. Tomorrow morning, some of my associates are going to come to your home. Do not be afraid. Just trust me. What do you mean? Don Romano smiled, a rare and surprising sight. You'll see. He stood, shook her hand firmly, left a stack of cash on the table, and walked out with Luca. Amora sat alone, surrounded by silent, watchful men, completely lost. Back on Amora's street, the neighborhood buzzed with rumor and fear. Mrs. Gable stood on her porch talking to Mr. Henderson from 3 doors down. "That girl Amora is mixed up with the Romano family now," Mrs. Gable said. "I told her no good would come of it." Mr. Henderson frowned. "The mob on our street? We have to do something." By dinnertime, the entire block was on edge. Parents warned their children to stay inside. Curtains were drawn tight. Doors were double-locked. No one knew what was coming, but everyone was afraid. And Amora, she rode the bus home with a pit in her stomach, wondering if she had just made the biggest, most dangerous mistake of her life. Amora awoke to a sound like a distant, approaching storm, a low, deep rumble of powerful engines. She rushed to her small window and looked out. Her street was lined with black sedans, 100 of them at least. Chrome and polished paint gleamed in the early morning sun. Men in dark suits stood in perfect, silent formation. "Oh my God," she whispered. Zoe ran into the room. "Mommy, why are there so many fancy cars?" Amora had no answer. She threw on her clothes and rushed outside, Zoe clinging tightly to her hand. The entire neighborhood had come out, but they weren't curious. They were terrified. Windows slammed shut, doors were locked, and parents pulled their children inside. Mrs. Gable stood on her porch, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, police. There's a gang on our street. The Romano family." Mr. Henderson ran towards Amora, his face red with anger. "Amora, what did you do? Why are they here? You brought the mob to our neighborhood. Our kids live here." Other neighbors gathered, their voices rising in a chorus of fear and accusation. "What were you thinking?" "I told you," Mrs. Gable shouted, pointing a trembling finger. "I warned you." The crowd pressed closer, a ring of angry faces and pointing fingers. Zoe started crying, burying her face in Amora's leg. "Mommy, I'm scared." Amora pulled her close, her own hand shaking uncontrollably. "It's okay, baby," but she didn't know if it was. Luca stepped forward from the line of men, his hands raised in a calming gesture. "Folks, we are not here to cause trouble." "Then why are you here?" Mr. Henderson shouted. "We are here to help one of your own," Luca announced, his voice carrying clearly down the street. "Amora saved a life 2 nights ago. Now, we are here to save hers." A stunned silence fell over the crowd. A large moving truck pulled up to the curb, and the men in suits began to unload boxes. Luca turned back to the crowd. "My name is Luca. I am the director of the Isabella Foundation, a non-profit organization that helps struggling families." "Non-profit," someone muttered skeptically. "Don Romano, the man Amora saved, is our founder," Luca continued. "He started the Isabella Foundation after his wife died tragically. In 20 years, we have helped over 3,000 families. We raise money, we pay medical bills, we prevent evictions." Mr. Henderson's face changed. "Wait, the Isabella Foundation? You helped my cousin in Chicago. Marco Henderson, a veteran with PTSD. You paid for his therapy." Luca nodded. A woman in the crowd gasped. "You paid for my son's heart surgery 2 years ago," another voice called out. "You saved my grandmother's house from foreclosure." The atmosphere on the street shifted instantly. Fear melted away, replaced by dawning understanding and awe. Mrs. Gable's hand flew to her mouth. "Lord, we judged you all so wrong." Don Romano himself stepped out of one of the cars, moving slowly but with undeniable authority. The crowd parted as he walked toward Amora. He turned to face the neighbors. "I understand," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "You saw the cars, the suits. You got scared. That's human." He pointed a finger at Amora. But this woman, she didn't see any of that. She saw a man dying in an alley, and she used her last $8, her daughter's breakfast money, to save my life. Complete silence descended upon the street. She didn't know who I was. She didn't care. She just saw a human being who needed help. That is the world I am trying to build. A world where people see people, not labels or reputations. An elderly man who had lived on the street for 40 years stepped forward, his eyes wet with tears. I judged you by your reputation, not your heart. I was wrong. I'm sorry. He extended his hand. Don Romano shook it firmly. We all make mistakes, sir. One by one, neighbors approached, apologizing, shaking hands. Mr. Henderson walked to Amora. I'm so sorry, I yelled. You were braver than all of us. Amora was too overwhelmed to speak. The Don turned back to her. You gave me a second chance at life. Allow me to give you 1 inch. He handed her a thick envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000. Amora stared at it, the number swimming before her eyes. For rent, for medical bills, for a new start, he said. There was more. A letter on official letterhead. The Isabella Foundation is pleased to offer you the position of community liaison. Salary, $60,000 per year. Full benefits. Health insurance. Start in 2 weeks. Amora's knees buckled. She dropped to the ground, sobbing with relief and disbelief. Zoe knelt beside her. Mommy, why are you crying? Happy tears, baby. Happy tears. The neighbors erupted in applause, some of them crying too. The car engines revved in a thunderous, celebratory salute. Mrs. Gable pulled Amora into a hug. Baby, you showed all of us how to be better people. I'm so sorry. The Don knelt beside Amora, wincing. One more thing. He pulled out a car key. We bought your car from the impound lot. It's fully repaired. It's around the corner. Amora looked up, her face streaked with tears. Why? Why all of this? The Don's eyes glistened. 20 years ago, my wife died because a good man was too afraid to help. I swore I would spend the rest of my life honoring people who weren't afraid. You saved my life with your last dollars. You didn't hesitate. You didn't ask for anything in return. That's the kind of person the world needs. That's the kind of person I need working for my foundation. I'm nobody special, she whispered. You're wrong, he said firmly. You are exactly who we have been looking for. Luca stepped forward. There's more. Come. He led her to the moving truck. Inside was beautiful furniture, a new bed for Zoe, shelves of groceries, toys, school supplies, new clothes. Amora laughed through her tears. This is too much. It's not enough, the Don said. But it's a start. The men in suits began unloading. The neighbors, who had been terrified an hour ago, stepped forward to help. Mr. Henderson grabbed a box. Where do you want this? Mrs. Gable directed traffic. Careful with that bed frame. The young mother who had locked her kids inside now had them helping carry bags of toys. The entire street came together, fear and prejudice transformed into community and love. And for the first time in years, Amora Jones didn't have to worry about tomorrow. 6 months later, Amora's life was unrecognizable. A nameplate on her desk at the Isabella Foundation read, Amora Jones, Community Liaison. She spent her days reviewing applications, visiting families, and offering the same hope she had been given. Zoe thrived, her asthma now completely managed by medication that was always available, her nights filled with sleep in a real bed, not worry. The vacant lot at the end of her street was now a bustling construction site. The Jones Center, named in her honor, was rising from the ground. At the groundbreaking ceremony, Amora stood with a shovel, surrounded by men in suits and her smiling neighbors. A local news reporter asked her, "How does it feel to have a community center named after you?" Amora smiled. "It's not about me. It's about what happens when people choose kindness over fear." The Jones Center opened to great fanfare. It housed a job training center, a food bank, an after-school program, and a medical clinic offering free checkups. Amora now led a team of 5 coordinators, each one a person she had helped first, now paying it forward. The foundation's work expanded, modeled on the success of her neighborhood. One day, Amora returned to the alley behind the diner. She spoke to the owner and got permission to place a small, discreet brass plaque on the brick wall. It read, "Here, a small act of kindness changed everything. The Isabella Foundation." Frank, the cook, saw her and walked over, wiping his hands on his apron. "I remember you," he said quietly. "I told you not to help him." Amora nodded. "I was wrong," he said, looking at the ground. "I've been following your story, what you've built. I'm sorry." Amora smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "We all learn. That's what matters." A year after that night in the alley, the Jones Center hosted an anniversary celebration. The building overflowed with people. Amora stood at a small podium, looking out at the crowd. Zoe sat in the front row, beaming. "A year ago," Amora began, "I spent my last $8 on a stranger. I didn't know who he was. I didn't care. All I saw was someone who needed help." The room applauded. "I was scared. People told me I was making a mistake. But what I've learned is this: kindness is never a mistake. Even when it costs you everything, especially then." That evening, after the party ended, Amora walked home. She still preferred to walk. As she passed a bus stop, she saw a young man sitting on the bench, his head in his hands. He was crying. Amora stopped. "Hey, are you okay?" The young man looked up, his eyes red. "I just lost my job. My wife is sick. I don't know what I'm going to do." Amora opened her purse and pulled out her wallet. She handed him $100. "What?" "No, I can't take this." "Yes, you can," Amora said gently. "It's a start." She pulled out a card for the Isabella Foundation and gave it to him. "When you're back on your feet, just help someone else. Pass it on. And if you need more help, you call that number." Tears streamed down his face. "Thank you. I won't forget this." Amora smiled. "I know you won't." She walked away, her heart full. A year ago, she had been the one with nothing, the one who needed a miracle. Now, she was the one giving them. The cycle continued, a ripple of compassion spreading outwards, all because of a choice made in a dark alley with just $8 in hand.